So there's just some different ideas that I think it would be helpful to go over. Um, and one of the ways that I refine my ideas is through conversations with other people and getting feedback and people letting me know what they think. And I've covered so many different disciplines that it's helped me to kind of look at things from a bird's eye view. I want to ask to what extent our understanding of history, to what extent it changes when we really see the reality of the hijacked narratives and the pseudo events. And how, yeah, when David Icke says that we're living in a simulation, to what extent we see that's true as we unmask the official accounts of so much that has defined the way we look at the world. And I do think a fair question is to ask, to what extent is the ordinary person complicit? Are there different levels of complicity? Is willful ignorance and self deception effectively the same thing? Of course, I've looked at history, the reality of false flag terrorism, reaching back from Operation Gladio, even more recent examples like the Oklahoma City bombings, the September 11th, and CIA drug dealing, and the entire way that we think about civil society. If it's wrong, then what does that say about the collective consciousness and the power of the collective belief system? You see, postmodernism, it became more interesting to me over the last couple of years because it's a philosophy that places narratives firmly at the center. But one person whose work has really helped me is Aaron Good. He wrote the book The American Exception, and he's the host of the American Exception podcast. It's really helped me a lot because, at least when it comes to 9/11 and the Kennedy assassination, the CIA drug dealing, he's unmasked those narratives. And so he's looking at history and asking, okay, we know the view of American civil society and politics that's been given to us. It's all been a lie. And so, using his knowledge of political science, he asks, what's left standing? How then can we describe the United States as a state? Who's really in control? Are we a democracy? And I'm trying to get him to come on the show and explain his concept of the tripartite state. What is the United States government's current relationship to fascism? Is there more of a connection between the historical fascism of Nazism and the United States government than maybe meets the eye? So these are good questions that we have to ask. And it's going to have massive implications for things like theology, touches on things like liberation theology, but also Carl Schmitt, who coined the term the exception. He was a jurist. He was a jurist, but he also considered himself a theologian. And he said that forget who you think might be in control of a government, parliament, president. He said, look at who is free to choose the exception when there can be an exception to the rule of law or emergency. He who can declare an exception or an emergency, that person is the person that's really sovereign, really in control. So looking at the United States from that point of view, who is it that can declare an emergency? And this is where Aaron Good refers to the work of Peter Dale Scott. And we get into the COG, continuity of government, there is this structure in place that decides the emergency and that can suspend the Constitution and keep things going. And that, so we ask, who's really controlling the continuing continuity of government? You know, they have these underground bases in Virginia, and they were active in 9/11. They were active when the Kennedy assassination happened. So are they there to react, or are they in somehow actually controlling the events? And when there are periods of potential liberalization and potential democratization in the United States, I can't say that word. There are moments when it looks like there's going to be more democratic control, more liberalization. That structure is there to step in to prevent that happening. And I actually heard Peter Dale Scott in a lecture one time saying that at the end of they were so good at reading the signs of the times, the elites and the continuity of government, that they could see that at the end of the 90s, the militarism was wrapping to a close. The Cold War had ended, and so they are there to step in, even stepping in like creating a September 11th in order to keep history going in the way they want it. You know, at the end of the 90s, there was a peace process that was on the table. It looked like there was going to be a two-state solution to the Israel-Palestine, but then 9/11 ruined that. So it's more than that they're there to step in an emergency. They're actually then creating the conflicts. It's very similar to what was going on in Operation Gladio. Originally, they were stay-behind networks to function in case there was a crisis of the state, like a full-on communist takeover. And so they did all this training to stay behind, burying weapons out in the woods. But then over time, they realized, oh, we can subvert the local election to keep communists from coming to power. But really, it was the same liberalizations and democratic trends that were in the United States that then used false flag terrorism to squash. So would it be legitimate to elect some sort of full-on dictator in the United States that then could go and be a force to be reckoned with this really entrenched elite continuity of government power? I think you can make the case for that. I think you could also make the case for that based on the literature of Carl Schmitt and other dissidents of National Socialism. So looking at if there's an emergency, how do you deal with it? And I think everybody on a fundamental level agrees that in theory, constitutional liberties can be restricted in times of emergency. That's why when you talk to most people about COVID, government harder daddy, they don't have a problem with it because they say the lockdowns and the quarantines, these were for health. And it was for the public safety. So in theory, I think people agree, but and in theory, I also agree. Maybe I think you could even go further in dealing with emergencies that have been identified, going further in the sense of full-on revolution. But where I differ is not that the hand of the state can be used in times of crisis. I think it can, but I differ in that I see these as false alarms. These are not real crises. And this is something that very few in academia have wanted to look at. They haven't wanted to touch the idea of if viruses exist or not. I'm not a specialist. So this is kind of where I'm coming from. And I would like to have a more fledged out view of history that takes into account these things like the hijack narratives and the pseudo events, because we can no longer afford to live in our bubbles where the disciplines don't talk to each other. We don't need more journalists, we need more social activists. So these are the kind of things I think about. And like I said, we're hoping to do an interview with Aaron Good in a couple of weeks. Still don't know. I'll keep my fingers crossed. But the mafia structure that's in the United States and that is so intermeshed with government to be indistinguishable. That's something that I'm hoping that Aaron Good can help us understand. And he was one of the only other journalists that I met who knew about the 2006 um, edition of the journal, the American Behavioral Scientist, where they looked at this concept that's been developed by Lance David Smith called SCAD. It's an acronym. It stands for State Crimes Against Democracy. And so I don't actually think that terms conspiracy theory is that helpful. I prefer to talk about crime, state crimes against democracy. And in courtrooms, in jurisprudence, people talk about conspiracy all the time. Judges write their verdicts declaring that there was a conspiracy. Um, Journalism needs to adopt a high standard of courts where things like circumstantial evidence, for example, is taken very seriously, and that's kind of poo-pooed in journalism, but in courts, judges actually look for circumstantial evidence because it is considered so strong, and you're able to make culminative arguments, the same kind of arguments that are poo-pooed in journalism. In courtrooms, they look for culminative arguments where it's not just one piece of evidence, but there's a lot of different pieces of evidence that overwhelmingly point to a conclusion and that mutually reinforce each other. So it's really uphill work if you're going to be an independent journalist and go against the mainstream. And people like to caricature you, and I guess it just comes with the territory. With the gift of gab from the City of Truth, that's Kid Rock, by the way. Thanks for tuning in. Remember, I don't know you are a listener until I hear from you. I really do like hearing from my listeners and seeing how they keep in touch with the show. If they watch it on BitChute, on Facebook, on YouTube, or Rumpel. So please let me know who you are, and thanks for supporting the show. And until the next time, see if I can get this right. Stay active, keep thinking, question more. It's Patrick Phillips, broadcasted live from Ecuador. That's all for now. Bye-bye.